Character Education Certification course. Everyone in the auditorium can be seated. Welcome to all of you that are watching online around the world. We're glad you're joining us tonight. And of course, we're continuing here in the fifth unit of the junior high series, the responsibility unit. And we're building off of everything that we've brought so far before these classes. And I know David kind of talked about that last class. And of course, we're always trying to remind everyone, because some people join in later on in these classes, not realizing or understanding that we're possibly in the fifth unit, that this is built upon 4 other units before this one. So we always try to re-emphasize these things. And we want everyone to know that you can go back and watch all of the classes where it started from the very first unit of the character unit, and that was back in November of 2020. And we started with the character unit, then we went into the acceptance unit, the self-control unit. We just recently finished the respect unit, and now we're starting the responsibility unit. And all of these units, one build upon the next. And as we bring out in the introduction of these units, that they need to be taught in the order they are presented. And it's very important, because it's like, it's like putting up the walls before you try to put the roof on. If you put the roof on first without the walls, you're not going to get very far. But you can try it, it just won't work. And that's the same thing with, teaching character education. And some people say, well, what if I just skip a little bit? Well, it's like trying to build your house and not creating a firm foundation. Instead of having a solid concrete foundation, you decide to build it on the beach. And when the tidal wave comes in or when troubles come, everything falls apart. And you wonder why your tools didn't work. Well, you got to have everything in working order. And it's a challenge. It's a challenge. David did a great job explaining last class how we continually are looking to build and grow in positive character and in morality. And you can even be a teacher. That doesn't mean that, I've got it all taken care of now. I just got to tell everybody else how to do it. It doesn't work that way. It would be nice if it did, but it doesn't. Trying to adapt and to take hold and to make positive character part of your life 100% of the time is absolutely possible. But in today's society, with as many challenges, stress, peer pressure, influences, and conformity that's taking place, you'll always want to examine yourself every week to see, well, how did I do? You want to have your own measuring scale and measure yourself according to what you've learned and according to what you're still learning, and then you can kind of grade yourself. And you don't want to beat yourself up, As we talked about being your own worst critic, you need to point out the things that you're moving forward in. If there's something you're having problems in getting out of your life, that's where we've talked about how you find a trusted adult to talk to, or guidance counselors, or someone you can confide in, because we all need to talk to someone at some time. No one's beyond that either. With that in mind, also a reminder from a drop-down menu on Facebook, you can download the responsibility unit. For those of you that are watching on the Peaceful Solution website at www.peacefulsolution.org or the app, you can also send in a request, and this is for anyone. You can send in a request, and we'll send you a link to Google Drive, and you can download all of the Peaceful Solution literature. It's available both on the Google link in English and in Spanish, the books that have been completed, and you're more than welcome to download those. They're PDF files, and they're searchable text, so it helps you as a teacher, which is what this course is all about, training to teach the program, and how to bring all of these things together. It makes it where you can search words, and you can make topics a lot easier to find. And when you're teaching and you're trying to go back and remember these things, it's easy to remember some things, but there'll always be some things you're trying to remember. Well, what did it say? And then when you remember what it said, then you got to remember which book you read it in. And sometimes you can spend an hour and a half looking for something that you could have found in 10 minutes in a PDF search. So it's there to be teacher friendly, and it helps a lot. And just also, someone was asking, well, how else could these benefit my children? I can tell you there's children that have learned how to read by playing the PDF and following along in the book. And they learned how to pronounce words, and they learned how to read. It helps them a lot, and I've seen that. I've seen that with my own eyes, and I know of children that'll go to sleep playing the PDF and it's reading the book to them. So there's all kinds of benefits that you can get from these things, and it's important that they're available to you. That's the important thing. If you choose to use them and have the ability to use them, then they're there for you. If not, if you're wondering how you can, just you can ask us if you're locally. or you can email us at info@peacefulsolution.org. You can find that on the website, the contact for the email. You can call the 1-888-613-9494 number. There's someone there that will answer, or you leave a message after office hours, or you can just message us on Facebook, and we'll be more than glad to tell you how these things can be used and how you can use them in your life. So turning over here, David left off, he got started on page 9, and that's procedure 5, and he was talking about how responsibility is learned. And that's a very key, important topic right there at the very beginning on how responsibility is learned. And he had just finished reading about shared responsibility. And if you look back on page 8, I want to read this, and then we're going to go to the procedure. But it says, although we have different responsibilities, if everyone fulfills their duties as they are instructed, we could create a world where we can rely on and trust others. So we all have a part to play. Some people's responsibilities may not be as, I would say important, but that would be the wrong word to use. I think prestigious. You know, some things are like, well, that guy's really important, but me, I just do this. But let someone not do that simple, basic job one day, and you realize just how important that simple, basic job that people think are so, it's just a small thing. The guy only picks up trash. That's all he does. He's a garbage collector. If you've never been to a country where they don't collect trash, you realize that's a very important thing. It's nice to have your trash collected. It's nice to be able to just take it to the dumpster, and some people think that's a job. You know, well, I got to take it all the way out there. You know, trust me, I have heard campaigns when a child has to take the trash out. Man, it's almost like you ask them to go over and find peace in Israel right now. You know, that'd be easier than taking the trash out. And I'm not suggesting to take that lightly, but it's dramatic. You know, it can be dramatized greatly. But looking back over here to the procedures, so we can read back through them again, and we're going to go back and read some things to remind us of what David covered also, because that was finishing up procedure 4 with page 8, and we're on procedure 5, and that's going to require us to go back and look at a couple things to refresh in our minds what we've covered thus far. We're not too far in this book, but also some things we've covered in other books. Procedure 5 says, discuss as a class what some of the responsibilities are. So that's one thing it's telling you right there, no matter how big your class is. And David gave a great example. Sometimes we have a class of 1. Sometimes we have classes of 3, sometimes of 8, 10, 12. I think our largest class we ever had was about 1,400 students. And obviously that's very hard to have a class discussion. But you do discuss with the auditorium, and you select certain people. That's probably the largest class we've ever had. And of course, then we have classes online. And we're getting ready to try to start. We do have classes, just so everyone knows, if they're interested, we do have classes that are held on Saturdays that are interactive classes where you can actually give feedback. And we have 2 of those classes. If you're interested in participating in those, you're more than welcome to email us or send us a message on Facebook, and we'll get you the times, because it depends on where you live and what country you live in as to what time the class you will be assigned to, because it better benefits you to be in that. They work on time zones, and you know what's convenient for us might be 2 o'clock in the morning for you. So we want to make sure that we got the class set up for you also, because we do arrange these classes for all countries. So you can also send in a message and ask about those also. The teachers that teach those classes do really well. They've been training for many years, and they do very well with those classes. And there's also some offered on Sunday mornings. They were teaching classes this morning also. So all of these classes are available for anyone that wants them, and it's important to know that. But going back to the class discussion, and of course you have to use measure your time, what you can use. You can't spend the whole class talking about something, but you're gauging the minds, and that's what we need to remember as a teacher. When we're having a class discussion, you're listening to see what are they saying that we've covered thus far. How are they addressing things? Are they approaching it from the information that they should now have as knowledge from the character, acceptance, self-control, and respect unit? Or is it something you want to listen? Are they speaking with emotion? Well, I think this. And then here comes a lot of emotional drama right in behind it. and that lets you know you probably need to go back and cover some other things. And we all see that in our own lives too, though. And that's one thing to gauge yourself with. If you ever, remember anger, it's a secondary emotion. So there's embarrassment or other things that takes place before that, disappointment, and it leads to other things. But we allow these things to take place. And that's one way to gauge ourselves when we're having this discussion, is to always remember that even though you might have young adults, young children, you might have a classroom full of adults, it's still everyone's in the same, you could say game, but it's not a game. It's a very real world. But we're in the same strategic testing zone, I guess you could say, where humans love to test each other's patience. That's just part of our abilities that we have, is we like to see, I wouldn't want anyone to do that to me, but let me go do it to him. It's like calling people names and so forth. Well, in this class discussion, use it as a gauge, because that's what it is. It's a gauge to see what your students have so far. Notice it says guide class discussion. So that's the responsibility of a teacher. This is your job to guide this class discussion by asking students how they think they will learn to be responsible for these duties. Ask and accept as many answers as time permits. Have students turn to page 9 in their handbooks and read the section entitled, How is Responsibility Learned? You also want to ask them the question, how is responsibility learned? Why is it learned? And all of these things, just by saying it's learned, as a teacher of the Peaceful Solution in the units we covered, you realize, one, you're not born with it. You're not born with any positive character traits. You're not born, remember, we covered also in the acceptance unit with things like negative character traits, such as hate. You're not born hating someone. You have to learn how to hate someone. You're not born responsible. You have to be taught to be responsible. And if you're born into a family where there's a lot of irresponsibility, you've got a challenge there, because now you're going to have to try to learn responsibility from people that aren't responsible themselves. So that's why it's so important for us to develop these traits, because there are other people depending on us, whether it is a coworker or even your very own child. And sometimes when a child gets out into the workforce, if they are capable of getting out into the workforce, I know people that are 40 and 50 years old that have never had a job to this day. They were never taught the responsibility of having a job. And once you go 30 years without working, you tend to think that, well, it's everybody else's responsibility to do this. In reality, it's not. But if someone's been taught that way, you have to understand that they really believe that. It's just like if you tell someone the color yellow is really green, and they're told that their whole life, it's green to them, even though we all know it's not. So there's a whole retraining process that has to take place. And it doesn't start with just telling someone, well, you're wrong in your ideology. You have to show them rather than tell them. It's a lot easier to teach someone that they're wrong so they can see it for themselves than to just say, well, you're wrong. Or some people would say, well, you're crazy. How you been doing that your whole life? If you're going to teach somebody, the best thing to do is not make an enemy at the very beginning. You need to make a friend with them and build trust. Remember, that also has to be earned. But as we're guiding this class discussion about the duties and responsibilities, and never assume people have been taught these things, because that's not necessarily true. Always remember that you have to start at the beginning of all procedures, all topics. Start very, very remedial, very basic, and then build from there. Once again, you accept as many answers as time permits, and then we're going to turn to page 9 in our handbooks and read the section entitled How Responsibility is Learned, and then allow students time to do the corresponding exercise on page 10. So turning over to page 9, and of course the first paragraph we're going to read is going to cause us to go back and remind ourselves of a few things. So looking over to page 9 and how responsibility is learned. Notice it starts out by saying, now that you know how important being responsible is, how is responsibility learned? Well, first of all, you want to ask them, where did you learn how important responsibility is? And if you look back over to page 4, that's the section that we covered that is being responsible. It's really that important. And you want to make sure you don't have to spend a lot of time on it, but you want to rehearse, get it back in their mind. In this class, since we're training to teach, we go over these things numerous times because we learn with repetition. And that's how the human mind works. That it's repeated, and it becomes a part of us as we learned, and we'll cover it here shortly. That's how we develop habits, either bad habits or negative habits or positive habits. That's how we learn it. But here on page 4, notice it says, have you ever considered what it would be like if everyone stopped being responsible for their actions, duties, and obligations? And once again, that was a question that you really need them to ponder on. And you should remind them, what are some things that you've thought about that you now see as important that someone is responsible for doing? Gathering the trash is one. Stopping at stop signs is another. If people are not responsible and stop, not necessarily, that's just a suggestion. Doesn't really mean you have to. It might seem okay until, you get hit or someone gets hurt, and we even get into, responsible drinking. You hear that. People drink and drive and people die. But there's other aspects that you want to ask them as young adults. What are some other things you're thankful people are responsible for? One thing a student brought up, and I never thought about this, but it made a lot of sense. It was comical when he said it. It made a lot of sense, though, and it was in Laredo, Texas. I heard this. The young man said, I'm glad the person that made my clothes was responsible enough to do it right. That way they're still on me by the time I get home at the end of the day. And I thought, yeah, that is pretty important if they're not falling apart somewhere in midday. That would be very embarrassing. But, you think about it, and there are places that go out of business and that don't have a great reputation because they do really bad work. That's why when you buy things, you tend to rely on name brands because you see that as, they're responsible. And I won't mention names of clothing or so forth, but people look at name brands. Some is with prestige, and some is just because, that's a quality pair right there. There's certain boots that you can buy that they'll custom make, even here locally. They'll custom make those boots, and they have a certain name, and of course everybody thinks you buy those are the best. And there might be, I've never owned a pair, but I've heard people that buy them and really like them. I've never owned a pair of those. Not too expensive for me. But if people are working a lot, they want something to last, that's what they do. And you think of name brands, and you think of, people do the same thing with automobiles. I will only buy a Toyota, or I will only buy a Chevy or a Ford or a GMC or a Dodge. And, and in reality, responsible people can build them. Things break down. That's just the way it is. But when you think about these name brands and think about something for yourself, is there something that whenever you want something of quality, that's what I want. I won't settle for anything less. I want that. Well, why do you feel that way? Because you've had a great experience with it. And then remember, that's the same way people look at us. If you're someone that's irresponsible, if you're someone that's destroyed things, if you're someone that's stolen things, if you're someone that's borrowed things and haven't returned them, well, that's the same thing as looking at a business that there's no way I'd do business with those people, or that's someone you look at and go, absolutely, not a doubt in my mind, I would let that guy borrow something because he will take care of it and he will return it. Or if someone tells you something, I can rely on what that man says because he's very accurate. He tries his best to describe things as he sees them and as he knows best about them. And all of that comes together and actually creates a very peaceful environment. But of course, if you look over on page 5, we also had the section on when people fail to take their duties and obligations seriously, they are called irresponsible. And notice on page 5, the very top, it says, irresponsible people tend to ignore their duties or fool around rather than work hard to fulfill their obligations. And you can only imagine, imagine how many people are waiting to hire people. So when you come to work, you can come to work and do what you want to do. Spend hours in the bathroom, make little gadgets, experiments, and do things. And, I was supposed to build something? Sorry about that. I'll get to that today. And you can only imagine because when you're on a job, time is what? Money. And if you want to get paid, you got to be making money. It's that simple. The boss man can't pay you if you're not generating revenue. And I know it would be nice if the boss man would work 3 times harder so he could pay you for taking your time. But I don't know many boss men that want to do that, or boss women. So everybody has to work together in a business. And when you think about all of these things, how they work together, we had a great example of COVID and what occurs, not necessarily because people were irresponsible, but just look at how when one line broke down, even supplying food to the grocery stores, and when it broke down in one part to the next, and, sort of like when Tyson Chicken, and this is not to say anything negative about Tyson Chicken, but when a lot of people got sick at work for them and it shut down their plants, it was almost impossible to get any product that they made. And of course, you walked into the stores and there was nothing on the shelves. They were just completely empty. And it wasn't that people were not producing like normal. They were just not working like normal because things were shut down. And it could allow, and a lot of that came from people who were sick and they still went to work or they still did things and the sickness spread. But even sickness, the spreading of sickness can come from people being irresponsible. And it causes a lot. It affects a lot. It goes a long way. And we tend not to really think about when we're irresponsible, and we all have irresponsibility in us. We're all still working to get that out of us. But we tend not to see, we see the here and now, but we don't see how far down the line we really affect things and how much we can really alter someone's life or the ability to have an opportunity. It can really be, sometimes it can really be life or death when you're talking about responsibility. But once again, back to page 9, we're talking about how these things are learned. And I want to just rehearse in our minds some things that we learned in the character unit. If we could put up the first slide. And this is something you should always remember this. It was page 73 of the character unit, and it was the making of a VIP, a very important person, or value, imitate, practice. And of course, we started off with value. And remember what values are. We first seen that definition on page 4 of the character unit. And it's something that you deem to be important. And that's individualized because what one person might value, another person might not. But positive character, responsibility, we all value someone being responsible when we're dealing with them, but how responsible are we when dealing with others? And sometimes you kind of learn cultures. And like, I'll give you an example. There's one culture that I deal with, and I know there's some people watching from there, and they understand what I'm talking about. When you make an appointment with them and they say 8 o'clock, don't show up till 10 because they're not going to show up till 10. Guaranteed they're going to be 2 hours late. That's just the way things work. And, and I've done that before, and I've never been late for an appointment yet because I just know how things work. That's just the way it goes. If they tell you they'll be there at 8, no. If you want to meet them at 8, tell them you're going to meet them at 6. Then they'll be there at 8. And that's kind of that whole environment there, and they find that as acceptable. But that's something that's kind of part of their culture. If they tell you and they show up late, but now it's very different. And I had an appointment with 3 people one time. I was there waiting. The person showed up about 2 hours late. And when they showed up, there was somebody else that was not there. Well, they got hysterical that the other person was late. And I thought, well, I'm not going to remind you you're 2 hours late. We'll just move forward in this. The other person showed up probably about 45 minutes later. But, it's kind of laughable to me, but it took me a while to get used to it. For a while, I was always sitting by myself for 2 hours. Then I finally realized it's always going to be this way. And I realized that after we put the program in, and we'll know it's making a change when they show up on time one day. And then we'll know we're moving, we're going the right direction. But until then, you just do your very best to work and to try to get it better. And remember that, we all have faults. But it's different when you travel 4 hours for a meeting and they travel 30 minutes and they're the ones that's 2 hours late. It can be frustrating, but you have to reassign that energy to something else. But back to the slide here, value. Consider what is important in your life. How can influences affect what you value and how you can achieve your values? And of course, remember, we always talked about, we should treat others the way we want to be treated. And then you have imitate. Be aware of what and who you imitate. Imitating negative behaviors and negative people who act immoral means that you are adopting negative character traits. Irresponsibility would be a negative character trait. For example, the main character in a popular movie always gets even when someone wrongs him. Remember, 2 wrongs don't make a right. And that's a statement that was made by the author. And you should consider that. I've had people that have come to myself and other peaceful solution teachers and go, you know, 2 wrongs, you can get a right out of 2 wrongs. And we have waited and we have listened, and no one's ever been able to explain how you can do that. It's not possible. If you take 2 lefts, you'll never take a right. You know, if you take 2 steps down, you're never going to go up. And if you make 2 bad decisions, it's never going to be a great decision. It's not possible. It's something that is, it's someone trying to justify wrongdoing and thinking it will eventually be okay. And it will never be okay. 2 wrongs will never make a right. But if you begin to imitate this character by retaliating when someone wrongs you, then you are imitating negative behavior that will develop. Notice, develop, grow, nurture. You're building, you're constructing. Imagine a child, how a child comes out not knowing anything, and then it learns to walk and talk and speak and all of these things. That's child development. But, of course, development as a human being doesn't stop. Doesn't stop when you're 5 years old and you can run. Doesn't stop when you ride a bicycle or when you get your driver's license. This developmental stage is always growing. Sometimes it lays stagnant in society. Society has the ability to regress in this development instead of moving forward. And that's very scary, but that comes from other things that we've talked about as diseases and things that deteriorate the mind and body, where you actually regress instead of moving forward. The article just came out about smoking marijuana. You know, I know there's a lot of popular people that they brag about how much marijuana they smoke, and a lot of people want to imitate these people, and they literally, it was just this past week or last week, a very popular person known for smoking marijuana, actually has people on his payroll to roll his marijuana cigarettes for him, came out and said, I'm going to quit smoking marijuana. And it made headline news. And it was actually a bogus, he just did it for a publicity stunt. And he got all of this advertising for free for edibles. You know, and I thought, he's a smart businessman, but it's amazing. Everybody wants to smoke marijuana like, I'm not going to say his name, but, you know, it's amazing because there's a scientific study that just came out this last week that proves smoking marijuana prohibits your ability to learn. It actually holds you back from learning, you know, and that's scary. But we'll legalize it anyway, right? We collect taxes off of it. But continuing on, it says, on the other hand, consider the person of moral potential you can become if you pick out all the positive moral traits and imitate them. And then notice here, practice. Moral choices and practice, make moral choices and practice beneficial behaviors that will build your character. Once again, building, developing. And we're talking about how responsibility is learned. A right behavior makes a habit, and it becomes a part of your character. For example, by practice being honest, or you could say responsible, you will be known as an honest or responsible person whom others can trust. And that's very important because, once again, we have to build this. And we're going to see as we move into our lesson plan here that just like trust has to be earned, responsibility has to be earned. We have to prove to people, show to people that we're responsible. And you get that even where, you know, we brought this out before, and I think it was either David or William that they talked about credit ratings and how you're identified through credit scores. And they determine through your credit score whether they deem you to be responsible or not. Well, if you go to buy a house, you go to buy a car, you have a credit card, whatever it is, before they give it to you, they want to see a score, and it's a number. They don't see you as an individual. They don't know what your name is. They recognize you by a social security number. And then everything that puts it together is, a lot of it's based now on algorithms. And it generates a number. And that number is supposed to deem how trustworthy or not trustworthy you really are. And now that number, think about this also, because in dealing with other people, it's very much true. The number on a credit score doesn't take for granted that there's been sickness in your family, or you broke your leg, or something took place and you were not able to work, or that something changed or altered your normal days of activity to where you could not keep your obligations. And of course, you can try to be responsible and call and say certain things and try to get things set in line. But these people that you tell them to, and imagine this, let's say you're going to pay a bill late, and you call a person and say, hey, I've had this, I've had that, I won't be able to do this, but as soon as I get back on my feet, I will do this, this, and this. And the person will tell you, I'll enter that in the computer and I'll put that in the notes right now. Just imagine if that person doesn't enter it in the computer and put it in the notes. And all of a sudden you start getting all of these other nasty messages. And then you start getting notifications from the credit bureau. And then your credit score drops. And you're somebody that was a really decent person who paid all of your bills on time. You got injured. And now everybody thinks you're a crook and you don't like to pay your bills and you're a thief. But they don't see everything that took place in your life. When we deal with each other, you might see some negative things in other people, but you don't know the story of how they got there. Could be a lack of education, could be trauma, could be some really bad things that took place in someone's life. But you know what everybody deserves is an opportunity. And that's very important, that if somebody is irresponsible, that should be a challenge to help them become responsible. Is there anybody sitting in the auditorium that's completely responsible for everything and there's no responsibility in their life? You know, I tend to think that you think you went through the day and you got everything done, and about 9:30 you'll get a phone call at night. Hey, did you remember to do that? Oh, no, I forgot. You know, and you realize, I thought I made it through the whole day. I was responsible, but no, here it came. No, I wasn't responsible. Well, as leaders, you know, it's important to remember that we will not mind being trained. And we went over this in the character unit on page 130. If we could put up the next slide, because remember, we're not born responsible. We're not born with positive character traits. These are things that we have to be taught. Now, we might have great genes, but you know that won't get us into being a positive person. But notice, a potential leader won't mind being trained, and that becomes any positive character trait. A person who wants to be a positive leader will actually look forward to being trained. Notice it says, not a born leader, join the crowd. Most people aren't either. But don't let that discourage you from learning how to lead. Remember, leaders are responsible. There are many things we are born not knowing how to do, such as reading, writing, or even riding a bike. Learning these skills might be difficult at first, but you not only learn how to do them, you learn how to do them well. Whether it be speaking, riding your bicycle, throwing a ball, running, so forth, all of these things. Leading others requires character, personality, and skills to be the very best. You must develop a positive character and a harmless, helpful personality. So notice here you're seeing both the character and the personality being put in together to be a great leader. Even though personality is a combination of your likes and dislikes, it's still very important when being a leader. You already know that you must maintain and develop a positive character on a daily basis. As for skills, well, you can learn the skills relevant to leadership in the same way you learn all of your other skills. You practice, practice, practice. You know, and who wants to have a leader that's not responsible? You know, I know in the United States, they always vote the president in. They love him when they vote him in, and they hate him after 4 years. And his job is to kind of rekindle the love when he goes up for election again. Even though half the people hate him, he's got to find a way to get people to love him again. And after that, they can hate him the next 4 years because he's done anyway. And it's laughable. It would be laughable if it wasn't really our lives that's coming into play here. But also remember on page 90, if we can go to the next slide, this is very important because responsibility really shows up front in this with our reputation precedes you. It really precedes all of us. And we're just putting in our mind once again how we learn. We have to learn these things. It says there are many advantages to maintaining a positive character. Once again, maintaining. We're building it and we're trying to maintain it. You just don't build it and let it go. One of which is your reputation. And think about responsibility. That's what we're talking about as a topic. So we're thinking about the reputation of being responsible. Your reputation is developed over time. It is the overall quality or character as seen or judged by people in general. It can also mean gaining recognition from others for some characteristics or abilities you possess, whether positive or negative. You must consistently demonstrate and maintain positive moral character traits in order to develop a great reputation. Once a bad reputation is established, it is difficult to undo what others think of you. It is far better to maintain a decent reputation, so be careful and pay attention to the reputation that you are building. And once again, we're talking about having a responsible reputation. But if we become irresponsible, if we can go to the next slide, and this is continuing on page 90 with our reputation precedes us. When negative character traits are demonstrated over a period of time, such as irresponsibility, they become part of your character and part of your reputation. Do you know anyone with a bad reputation? Don't yell out names, but think about, we should look at ourselves first. That's who we really should consider first. How are we irresponsible? What have we done that's not responsible? And we'll find something. Most likely don't have to search too hard. But the first thing that comes to our mind is always somebody else. That's the natural thing. That reputation was developed by some action others saw or heard about that person at one time or another, whether it's true or not. In other words, someone who steals will gain the reputation of being a thief and not be trusted. People will be afraid to leave their belongings around that person. Or, if someone is irresponsible, no one's going to want to let that person borrow something. Or if they borrow it, you're just hoping that you get it back in the proper working condition. Or that it shows back up in one piece. But going on to the next part, the very last part of page 90 of the character unit, it says, on the other hand, a person who has earned a reputation of being trustworthy, noticed, and responsible will be known as a dependable person. So trustworthy and responsible, those are two character traits that we must earn. Respect must freely be given. But to be trustworthy and responsible, that's something we do by the way we conduct ourselves, and it's done over a period of time. We will be known as a dependable person. He will be trusted, or she will be trusted, respected, and admired for his positive character traits, or her positive character traits. As you know, word gets around whether it's positive or negative, and your reputation is no different. In fact, you might know all about someone, though it might be true or not, without ever meeting them, because their reputation precedes them, just as your reputation precedes you. People are observing you all the time, or at all times, but they're always watching. And whether we know it or not, people are paying attention to us. And it's very important that we recognize that there's a standard that we have to recognize. The more others observe you, the more they put together a picture of what you're all about. So as you strive to maintain a positive moral character, you will maintain a positive reputation at the same time. And once again, we're basing this on responsibility. We talked about here on the very top of page 9, just getting into it really, how responsibility is something that is learned. And notice the very next sentence, it says responsibility, the top of page 9. Responsibility is a trait that is developed. Once again, think about child development. Think about watching something grow. Think about anything that you can, how you have proceeded in life, whether it's a job you first started doing and now you've developed the ability to do it well, you developed that ability. A lot of people develop abilities to do certain things. I think anybody that does like a job like this, we all have to develop the ability to speak in front of many, many people. When you first do it, you feel like you're going to pass out, you're going to vomit, you want to run away, and then you also realize that when we were going from one school to the next, sometimes you could have large groups and it was extremely difficult to teach, but you still had to teach. And you could do it and you could pull it all together and it was possible to get it done. And sometimes you could have small groups and they were more difficult to teach than the larger groups. But one thing that the Peaceful Solution always does, it generates feedback. It generates discussion. And of course, I don't know if you've ever had the honor of asking 1,400 students a question and get 600 replies in 3 seconds or less, but it can be a very chaotic situation. And getting people to observe, you have to remind them of the rules. Don't expect them to do it. Remind them. Raise your hand before you speak. And I'll come to you. Don't interrupt others while they're speaking. And all of those things all have to be put out there, people reminded, and that's part of being a responsible teacher. But of course, this developing these traits, just imagine, you think about this class going on tonight, and you think about, what if the teacher didn't show up? Well, the teacher could show up, and I'm looking at a sound room back here that is actually controlling the sound, controlling the TV monitors. It's streaming the class we're teaching right now live across the world. What if they didn't show up? Just be sitting here talking, right? Wouldn't be going anywhere. You wouldn't be able to hear me very well. So you think about, what about the person that unlocked the door? What if they didn't show up? Be hard to get in the building. You know, there's a lot of things that take place just to even have a class. A lot of people have to be responsible, and even the students themselves have to show up. Show up with a pen and paper. Show up with a book. You know, all of these things are part of being responsible, and we should recognize that. You know, we should compliment ourselves and recognize when we're being responsible. That's very important, because remember, self-respect and self-value. Well, responsibility is a trait that is developed when you have been taught in regards to how you treat others, how you treat possessions, how you work, and even how you play, help you to develop the character trait of responsibility. In other words, you have to be taught to be responsible in everything you do. And remember, a person who wants to become a leader will not mind being taught. You know, it's very important to realize that when someone tries to show us how to do something, even though we think we know how to do it, we should take the time to see how it's done. And I can tell you, one time I had someone showing me how to, weed eater, just put twine around it. And I thought, I've been doing that for years. Yeah. And here comes a 9-year-old boy. Let me show you how to do that. And I'm like, really? So I just thought, I'll give it to him. After he plays with it a little bit, I'll take it back. He showed me a better way to do it. Made sense, and it worked really well, and I thought, I guess I should, and I told him, I said, I didn't know how to do that. I'm glad you showed me. Where did you learn how to do that? Oh, well, my brother taught me. And I'm thinking, well, where did he learn how to do it? Because I didn't teach him how to do it. Well, somebody else taught him. So sometimes when somebody goes to show you something, it pays to watch, no matter how young they are or how old they are. Sometimes it pays just to be responsible enough to, close your mouth and watch to see if you learn something. That'll be great. Of course, now one time I seen somebody that was going to show me how to change spark plugs, and they took all the spark plug wires loose at one time, and they couldn't figure out how to get them back on. Not in the right proper order anyway. And I thought, when I seen those things coming off, I thought, that's a bad, bad decision right there. Because especially when they changed the spark plug wires and they pulled them all out. They just took them all out and threw them down. And they thought, I'll remember by links. It didn't work out too well. No, it had to find somebody that actually knew what they were doing to fix it. I wasn't the one that did it, but I was a responsible part or irresponsible party for watching it take place and not saying anything. But sometimes you just know it's going to be bad. And it was bad, it was bad enough to the point that the car didn't run to the next day, sadly. But these are things that we have to learn to do. We have to be humble enough to know that we can be taught. We can always be taught. But continuing on here, it says, your first lesson in learning to be responsible most likely came from your parents or guardians. And that's hoping that your parents or guardians are responsible people. Some people are born with some very irresponsible parents or guardians. Sadly, some people are so irresponsible the child never makes it. They end up going to a planning clinic, I'll leave it at that, who will teach you how to have a family. And the first thing they teach you to do is to eliminate your responsibility, which is being very irresponsible. And we've covered that in great detail before, so I won't get into it. But that is a form of being irresponsible. When you take a life of someone, so you don't have to take care of them, because you were not responsible in your decisions to begin with, that's a very irresponsible thing to do. And I think there's many classes that's been covered on that so far, but that's just one example. But continuing on here, it says, for example, a 3-year-old child might be responsible for picking toys off the floor and putting them back on the shelf. However, that same 3-year-old would not be responsible for taking out the garbage or washing the dishes. These responsibilities would be assigned to someone who is older. Because we have the developmental stage, and you have to give assignments according to what that person can handle. And sometimes it's not always based on age, but when you're looking at 3, 5, 8, 10, 15, you have to put that into play. But going to the next one, and then we'll use some more examples here. It says, when you begin your school years, You learn to be responsible when asked to erase the chalkboard, distribute students' workbooks, and so on. As you grow older, responsibilities will develop with you. But I want you to think. Let's say you go to school and you have a cafeteria. And at your school cafeteria, you're responsible for cleaning up your eating area. Let's just say you never do it. Somebody else will do it. Well, if the teacher doesn't remind them, no, if we want this to be clean, free of flies, free of maggots, free of, not having food that stinks, free of having disease, then the teacher themselves will teach them, this is what you do and how you do it. But you know what? If there's multiple teachers, all of those teachers have to be in complete agreement. You can't have one teacher that teaches them, this is what you guys do, okay? You come over here, you wash them, this is where you put this is where you do this, and this is how you do it. And you show them. And if the next teacher comes behind and goes, you ain't got to do that. And then you have someone that goes, well, you're forcing me to do that. Well, you don't have to eat the next day. If your plate's dirty or if your dishes disappear, if you don't have a clean place, think about the bathroom. If everybody felt that they had to be forced to clean the bathroom, could you imagine what the bathrooms would be like when it's your turn to go use it? Could you imagine how filthy and disgusting if people did not look at it as this is a responsible thing to do? When I go in, I should leave it cleaner than what I found it. The same thing with our food, with our dishes, everything else. We should have the mentality through being taught by responsible teachers, this is how I should do it. Now, if you're a teacher that's like, don't worry about it. What are you teaching them? Someone's going to have to worry about it. Someone's going to have to do it. Are you teaching them to put the burden on other people? Are you teaching them that you can be irresponsible, but somebody who's responsible will eventually come behind you and do it? And how will that work for that child and the development of this child? It won't turn out very well. And whenever we start seeing that it's slipping and being responsible in other areas, well, where did it start? And who taught that? Who allowed it? We have to be careful when we think that we want to grow and nurture children, and you never want to force a child to make a right choice. But you have to understand there's things that have to be done. I can't say, well, I don't want to stop. You can't force me with that stop sign to stop. Well, no, there's rules you have to follow. And if you want to stay safe, if you want to have a healthy life, you have to. That's like saying when you get older, I'm not paying taxes. You can't force me. Oh, yeah, they can too. Yeah, well, and it is odd that if you don't pay your taxes, you're not responsible. They'll put you in a place where taxpayers will pay to keep you up, which is kind of ironic that you don't pay taxes, but you collect them by sitting in prison. But there are things that we have in our society, and teaching responsibility is difficult. It's not always welcome, and it's not a forceful thing to teach a child to be responsible. To teach it to, when you use the bathroom, children have the ability to do things that are amazing, that it's disgusting, but they're amazing. And they leave things very nasty. Well, they should be taught how to clean. If they think that that's just the way it goes and it's clean when I come back, well, the person cleaning it is not enjoying cleaning it. So that's something that has to be taught. And it takes responsible teachers to do that. And everybody has to be in agreement. It's like when they talk about, well, mom said no, but I'll go ask dad. Well, mom said I had to clean my room. Dad said he didn't care. Well, if the room doesn't get cleaned, then who's not going to enjoy it eventually? Eventually, Mom, can you clean my room? It's nasty. It stinks in here. I don't know how it got this way. Well, it got that way due to a lack of irresponsibility, or being irresponsible, lack of responsibility. But we have to really examine these things. And remember, child development, growth in adults even, it's kind of like I heard somebody say they're a health nut. And this is somebody that's big over in Europe. And I don't even know how to pronounce his name, but I was watching him do a discussion, and he was talking about training. And the guy is in great shape as far as physical shape. He's a smaller guy, but just amazing what kind of shape he's in. And I thought it was ironic. He said, I trained 14 hours a day, every day for 15 years. And he said, I hated every minute of it. When I got up and I went to train, I hated going to train. When I was training, I hated it. And I thought, well, why'd you do it? Well, that's how he makes his living. That's his job. He's a trainer. So for him to be a trainer, you don't want to have someone there that's 40 pounds overweight showing you how to be well, this is what you do to get in shape. So you kind of got to be that standard for others. But it was very interesting that the things that he had to do to get to where he wanted to be, he said he hated every second of it because I couldn't stand it. I hated it. It's the same way with character development. There's a lot of things we're going to have to do, and it's really beneficial to us. And we might not like doing it, like doing the dishes, taking out the trash, cleaning our room, scrubbing the toilet, washing your dishes when you're done, not leaving the food out. There's a lot of things we might not like doing, but when we go back to eat our meal the next day, well, we kind of want a clean plate to eat out of. You don't want to scrape out 3-day-old food and put your new food in it. So if you don't want that, you should be responsible to do that. But once again, these are things that have to be taught. They have to be developed. Well, continuing on here, it says sooner or later, as you grow older, responsibilities will develop with you. Sooner or later, you will obtain a part-time job and you will learn responsibility there. This is more of that developmental stage. As you perform the roles or tasks that job entails. One of those things, remember, showing up on time, doing the job as instructed, as we'll get into. It says 2 very important aspects of learning to be responsible are to always follow instructions given precisely and to bear in mind the importance of the duty that you are responsible for. And it's one thing to always keep in your mind. I had a teacher that always pressed this in my mind, and other teachers that I teach with, especially the ones that teach the Peaceful Solution. We all had the same teacher who put this in our mind very strongly, that he said you should look at it, this is a standard. Always be careful to observe everything you're instructed to do. Look at that as life. Be careful to observe and then do everything you were instructed to do, how you were instructed to do it. Because when you're teaching, you're dealing with someone else's life. It's not a game. It's not something to where you can go, oh, oops, sorry. I was just joking. I didn't mean for you to do that. When you're supposed to be an example to others and people are relying on your words, you have to remind yourself that you need to, the things that have been proven to work and to keep people safe, you need to stick with those. And you shouldn't get away from those things. And it's the same thing with, if you have children, you have to teach your children to be responsible. If you're a teacher, you have children. You have to teach them to be responsible. And it doesn't mean that they can be responsible when they go home. When they come here, they can be irresponsible. Do you know what the parents are going to think if you're letting them come to school and be irresponsible and they're trying to teach them to be responsible? And you tell them, you need to go do this. Wash the dishes. Well, teacher, school says I don't have to. You can't force me to do that. Well, you can't force me to cook your food the next day either, can you? It can really become a tit for tat. And there's a lot of negativity in that, though. And it's very important that we see education and the training of education is not a negative thing. The lack of education, the lack of training in education is a negative thing. And I don't mean 1 + 1 is 2. I mean just very basic, common everyday tasks that have to be done. We can teach irresponsibility by being teachers that we just feel like we should overlook everything and just let it go. Well, if you do that, you're letting the world, as the author of The Peaceful Solution had a very popular saying, it's like letting it go to hell in a handbasket. And that's what we do. But who do we look at because this took place? We have to look in the mirror. That's really where we have to look. Continuing on, it says, were you taught how to wash dishes? So think about that. If your students have the responsibility of washing dishes, did someone teach them? Yeah, that means have a class. That means bring them back there and actually show them how to do it. Don't expect them to know how to do something without showing them how to do it. Children, most of the time, want to please the people that they're with as far as authority figures, their parents. They truly want to do what is right. And when they mess up or something goes wrong, the first thing we should do is look and see, did we instruct them? Did we teach them? Did we actually show them how to do it? And then if we did and they didn't get it, then do it again. And then do it again. And then do it again. But the last thing you should do is look at them and start tearing into them. You chew them out, put them down for something they haven't been taught how to do. That's called criticism. Whenever you expect a child to do something they haven't been taught to do, that's criticism. But when you teach a child how to do something and they don't do it right, and you point out the things that's wrong and you show them how to do it again, that's called education. That's not called criticism. That's education. But if you're not willing to take that child and show it where it fell short and show it how to do it right, that's called irresponsibility. You have to be able to do that. And you have to do it with compassion. And you have to do it with long suffering. And if you've ever had a child, you'll know you have to do that. That's just part of raising children. As a parent, you have to do that if you want your children to succeed in life. You have to take the time to do that. And sometimes it's just having a short discussion. Sometimes it can be a discussion that lasts for a couple hours, depending on the topic and the questions that are asked. But you have to take the time to do it. I live in a community to where other people help. Everybody helps. Everybody will help everybody. And that's a great thing when it takes place that way, because everybody's trying to be responsible for keeping the community safe. And that takes a whole community to do that. But continuing on, it said, did you know that if they are not rinsed properly, speaking of these dishes, removing all food particles, the stale food left on them can grow bacteria that sometimes cause food poisoning. Therefore, pay close attention as you learn your duties and do them to the best of your ability. So once again, someone teaches you how to do it, you learn how to do it, you put it into practice, and you do it. So if you want a clean dish to eat out of, you have to be able to wash dishes. If you're not worried about eating out of dishes and garbage cans are your preferred item to eat out of, then, you probably need to learn how to clean a garbage can. But there's some people that think that, and I was one of them growing up, I don't want to wash dishes. Why do I have to wash dishes? How much am I going to get paid to wash these dishes? And I remember my dad telling me one time, well, I'll pay you to wash the dish and you're going to pay for the food that goes in it. I thought, no, I'll go wash the dish. I'll just wash the dish. And, but it was one thing. I never forgot it either. But, as a child, we tend to think we're entitled well, you owe me this. Not really. In other words, I want my parents to be responsible so I can be irresponsible. You should just feed me and clothe me and don't expect anything from me. That's the way life's supposed to be. Well, it's not really that way. And as we grow older, we become more thankful that we were held to a certain standard. But when you let a child go, it only keeps going downhill. If they didn't develop it at 5 or 10 or 15 or 20, they're going to have to develop it at 25 or 30 or 35 or 40. Sooner or later, if they want to have the positive character traits, they're going to have to develop it. And the whole point of this, the reason we spent so much time on this tonight is this is something that has to be learned, so it has to be taught. It has to be done. It's a you must do thing. And if we overlook it, well, how does that define us as teachers? Now, there's nothing wrong with overlooking somebody doing something wrong and you teach them how to do it again. But you have to teach them. You can't overlook it yourself. There has to be a teaching that takes place. And I'm very thankful, and I know some of the other teachers are. We had a teacher that was very patient with us in teaching us, and we're still learning too, but very, very patient with us. But looking over to this exercise, and we're just going to read through this really quickly, and this is something just for you to consider. As your classroom discussion and thinking about, discussing how this is learned, you ask them to list some things that they're responsible for. And everybody will have different responsibilities. There's different things people will be responsible for. Some people have brothers and sisters. Some people are alone, children that are alone. Some people might be with guardians, grandparents. There's all kinds of different responsibilities people will have. But have them list them. And then, of course, the next one is, how do you think you were taught to be responsible for these duties? Someone had to teach you, have them kind of explore. Well, how did you learn to do it? Why is it important to you? Who showed you that it was important? And then last but not least, it says, what would occur if you chose to be irresponsible and leave your duties undone? Once again, let me read that. What would occur if you choose to be irresponsible? That means you didn't do what you're supposed to do and you leave your duties undone. What would occur? Well, if you leave dirty dishes sitting in a room, it takes a responsible teacher to come clean them up. Until the children are taught responsibility, they're always going to be dirty. The room will always be dirty. The trash will always be overflowing. It has to be some responsibility that is taught. And once again, you ever heard of growing pains? We all have them. It's just part of it, But once again, with using the peaceful solution, there's compassion, there's empathy, but there's a lot of patience and repetition that's shown over and over and over. So not that I wanted to take a lot of time on that one page. Next class, we're going to get into the do's and don'ts, which is the beginning of Procedure 6. But I think it's very important that we always remember throughout this program that we're learning. And we're going to get into page 11 here. And this is going to be the second time we discuss how knowledge is power. Well, knowledge is only power if you're taught, if you're educated, and shown how to put it into use. Someone can give you the knowledge, but if they don't show you how it's applied, it's not going to benefit you any. So we have to do that as teachers. We have to make sure that we're held to a higher standard than the ones that we're teaching, because you can never expect any more from your students than what you gave them as a teacher, whether it be in teaching the peaceful solution, teaching how to work on a car, drive a car, teaching how to ride a bike, teaching how to do any job, electrician, plumber, whatever it is. They'll only do as great as they're taught to do. And that's all we can do, because we have to be taught. These are things we have to be educated by. So we're going to stop there on page 11. We'll pick up on page 11, Procedure 6, next class. Our next class will be this coming Wednesday on the 29th, and we'll start back at 5:30 p.m. on the 29th. Once again, thank you for joining us.